What you're about to hear are 5 real accounts of Bigfoot encounters that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the wilderness. These stories come from ordinary people who ventured into the deep forests of North America and came face to face with something that shouldn't exist. I've spent months verifying these accounts, speaking with witnesses, and investigating the locations. What I discovered will chill you to the bone. From a family camping trip that turned into a nightmare, to a solo hiker's brush with death, these encounters escalate in terror. The final story? Well, it's so disturbing that the witness has never spoken publicly about it until now. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for 5 terrifying Bigfoot encounters. But I warn you, after hearing these stories, you may never look at the forest the same way again.
Story 1. The Family Camping Trip. Our first encounter comes from the Johnson family. Mark, his wife Sarah, and their 2 young children, aged 8 and 10. In July 2019, they decided to spend a weekend camping in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. We'd been to this campsite dozens of times. It was our family's favorite spot, secluded, peaceful, about 3 miles from the nearest road. Everything seemed normal on their first night. The kids roasted marshmallows, they told ghost stories, and everyone settled into their tents around 10 p.m. But at 2:17 a.m., Mark remembers the exact time because he checked his watch. Something massive began circling their campsite. Footsteps on the forest floor, heavy breathing. At first, I thought it was a bear, Mark recalls. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, but then I realized bears don't walk upright for that long. Through the thin walls of their tent, the family could hear whatever it was moving in a perfect circle around their camp. The footsteps would stop directly outside each tent for several seconds, as if studying the occupants inside. Tent fabric rustling, children whimpering. Sarah grabbed her phone and started recording the audio. What she captured was 47 minutes of methodical pacing, occasional low grunts, and at one point, what sounded like sniffing directly above their tent. "The smell hit us around 3 a.m., Sarah whispers in the recording. Like wet dog mixed with something rotting. It was so strong we could barely breathe inside the tent." The creature continued its patrol until sunrise. When the family finally emerged from their tents, they found massive footprints, 18 inches long, clearly showing 5 toes, forming a perfect circle around their campsite. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Ominous music builds. Each footprint was filled with small bones and feathers, like offerings or warnings. The Johnsons packed up immediately and have never returned to those mountains.
Story 2. The Night Shift Worker. Our second encounter takes us to Northern California, where 34-year-old truck driver Miguel Santos was making his regular late-night delivery to a remote logging operation in 2021. Miguel had been driving the same route for 8 years, a winding mountain road that cut through dense redwood forests. He knew every turn, every mile marker. But on this particular October night, something was different.
I was about 15 miles from the logging camp when I saw it standing in the middle of the road, Miguel recounts. At first, my headlights just showed this massive shadow. I thought maybe a tree had fallen. As Miguel's truck came to a stop, his headlights illuminated something that defied explanation. Standing in the road was a creature nearly 9 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown fur, with arms that hung down past its knees.
It just stood there, staring at me through the windshield. Its eyes, they reflected the light like an animal's, but there was something intelligent behind them, something that was studying me.
For nearly 10 minutes, neither Miguel nor the creature moved. The standoff was broken when the creature began approaching the truck, not aggressively, but with a curious, almost cautious gait.
That's when I noticed its hands. They weren't paws or claws. They were hands, just like ours, but massive. It reached out and touched the hood of my truck, and I could hear the metal creaking under the pressure. Miguel grabbed his phone to record, but as soon as the creature saw the device, its demeanor changed instantly.
It let out this roar that made my whole truck shake. Then it brought its fist down on my hood so hard it left a dent the size of a dinner plate. I've never been so terrified in my life. The creature stepped aside, but continued watching as Miguel drove past. In his rearview mirror, he could see it following his taillights for nearly a mile before disappearing into the tree line. Miguel reported the incident to his company, but they dismissed it as stress from too many night shifts. He still drives that route, but now he carries a shotgun and has installed additional lights on his truck. Story 3: The Olympic Forest Encounter. Our third story brings us back to where we began, the Olympic National Forest in Washington. This is my own encounter from 3 nights ago, but I've since learned I wasn't the only one who had a terrifying experience in that area. I had gone camping alone, something I'd done hundreds of times before. I'm an experienced outdoorsman, comfortable in the wilderness. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on my second night. I was setting up my camp just before sunset, about 4 miles from the nearest trail. The location was perfect, a small clearing surrounded by massive Douglas firs with a creek running nearby. I felt completely at peace until I heard the branches snapping.
Sharp crack of breaking wood. At first, I assumed it was a deer or maybe an elk moving through the underbrush. But the sounds were too deliberate, too rhythmic. Something was moving toward my campsite, breaking branches as it came.
Footsteps through the forest, getting closer. I turned around and saw 2 glowing eyes reflecting my headlamp's light, positioned about 8 feet off the ground. My blood ran cold as I realized I was looking at something massive, something that shouldn't exist.
The creature was covered in dark, matted fur and built like a bodybuilder, but scaled up to impossible proportions. Its shoulders were wider than any human's, and its arms were disproportionately long. But what terrified me most was its face. It looked almost human, but wrong. The features were too pronounced, too primitive. And its eyes, they weren't just animal eyes. There was intelligence there, awareness. It was studying me just as much as I was studying it.
Then it made a sound I'll never forget. A deep, bone-chilling growl that I felt vibrating in my chest cavity. The sound was so low, so powerful, that it seemed to come from the earth itself.
I reached for my camera, but in the split second I looked away, it vanished. 8 feet of creature, gone without a sound. But it left something behind, footprints in the soft earth near the creek, and several broken branches arranged in what looked like a deliberate pattern. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every shadow made my heart race. And I know, beyond any doubt, that it was watching me from the tree line until sunrise. Story 4: The Hunting Party. Our fourth encounter comes from a group of experienced hunters in the forests of northern Idaho. In November 2020, 5 men, all seasoned outdoorsmen with decades of hunting experience, ventured into the remote Clearwater National Forest for their annual elk hunting trip. The group included retired military personnel and local guides who knew these mountains better than anyone. They were well-armed, well-prepared, and confident in their abilities to handle any wildlife encounter. On their third night, the hunters were sitting around their campfire when they began hearing what sounded like wood knocking, a rhythmic tapping that echoed through the forest. "We thought it was another hunting party," recalls David Martinez, the group's leader. Wood knocking is something hunters do to communicate across long distances. But when we knocked back, the response wasn't right.
The knocking became more intense, faster, and seemed to be coming from multiple directions. Then they heard the voices. It sounded like people talking, but we couldn't make out the words, David explains. The voices were too deep, too distorted, and they were coming from up in the trees, 30 or 40 feet off the ground.
The hunters grabbed their weapons and flashlights, forming a defensive circle around their camp. That's when they saw the shapes moving between the trees, multiple large figures coordinating their movements like a hunting pack. There were at least 3 of them, recalls team member Jake Wilson. They were massive, taller and broader than any human. They moved through the forest like they owned it, barely making a sound despite their size. The creatures began throwing rocks, not small pebbles, but stones the size of basketballs that crashed through the trees around the camp. The hunters realized they were being herded, pushed away from the area. These things were intelligent, David emphasizes. They weren't just aggressive animals. They were using tactics, working together to drive us out of their territory. The siege lasted for over 2 hours. The creatures would approach from one direction, forcing the hunters to aim their weapons that way, then retreat and attack from another angle. They were being toyed with by something far more intelligent than any known animal. Finally, one of the creatures let out a howl that echoed through the entire valley, a sound so primal and terrifying that it seemed to come from humanity's deepest nightmares. Within minutes, all the creatures had vanished, leaving the 5 hunters alone in the sudden oppressive silence. They broke camp immediately and hiked out through the night, despite the danger of navigating mountain terrain in darkness. All 5 men, experienced hunters and military veterans, admitted they had never been so frightened in their lives.
Story 5: The Research Expedition. Our final encounter is the most disturbing, and until now it has never been shared publicly. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a wildlife biologist with over 20 years of field experience, agreed to tell her story on the condition that I not reveal the exact location. In September 2022, Dr. Chen was leading a small research team studying wildlife patterns in an unnamed forest in the Pacific Northwest. The expedition was supposed to last 2 weeks, documenting animal behavior using trail cameras and remote sensors. We chose this location specifically because of the unusual wildlife reports, Dr. Chen explains. Local indigenous tribes had stories about this area going back centuries, describing encounters with large humanoid creatures.
On day 4 of their expedition, the team's motion sensors began detecting something unusual, a large bipedal figure that appeared on multiple cameras throughout the night, always just at the edge of the frame. The footage was remarkable, Dr. Chen recalls. Whatever this creature was, it was intelligent enough to avoid our cameras while still triggering the motion sensors. It was studying our equipment, learning our patterns. But on day 6, something changed. The creature stopped hiding. Dr. Chen was alone at the base camp while her colleagues were checking equipment upriver. She was analyzing data when she heard breathing behind her. Slow, deep, deliberate breaths that were definitely not human. I turned around and found myself face to face with something that shouldn't exist, she whispers. It was less than 10 feet away, crouched down so it could look directly into my eyes. The creature was enormous. Dr. Chen estimates at least 10 feet tall when standing upright. Its face was a disturbing blend of human and ape features, with deep-set eyes that showed unmistakable intelligence.
What terrified me most wasn't its size or appearance, Dr. Chen continues. It was the way it looked at me, like it was trying to communicate, trying to understand what I was doing in its territory. The creature reached out slowly and touched one of her research notebooks, gently turning the pages with surprising dexterity. It studied her drawings and notes for several minutes while Dr. Chen remained frozen in terror.
Then it did something that haunts Dr. Chen to this day. The creature began to vocalize, not growls or roars, but what sounded like an attempt at speech. Broken syllables that almost resembled words. It was trying to talk to me, Dr. Chen realizes, her voice breaking. This wasn't just an animal. It was a being with language, with consciousness, trying to bridge the gap between our species. The encounter lasted nearly an hour. When Dr. Chen's colleagues returned, they found her sitting in the exact same position, tears streaming down her face. The creature was gone, but it had left behind a gift, a carefully arranged collection of unusual stones and bones that weren't native to the area.
Dr. Chen's team immediately ended their expedition. She has never returned to field research and now works exclusively in laboratory settings. The footage and evidence from their encounter remain classified. If you liked this video, then please like and subscribe for more awesome content.